Yes. What struck you most about it?
What struck me most is that she is still trying to give the impression of working, as she said at the outset, in a, quote, bipartisan way. And yet her voting record is clearly contrary to that.
Mm-hmm.
What also struck me is that she put people off when they were starting to get into the question as to how things are done in Washington. Which gets into the guts of the problem that she's trying to solve. And she says, well, go talk to my staff or talk to me afterwards. There are a few questions like that arose, and if it were me running a town meeting, hosting a town meeting, as obviously she is, I wouldn't have done that. I would have said, look, this is how things happen in Washington. This is what's really going on. That's the solution to this problem. She's clearly not willing to do that. And I think that's a serious shortcoming.
What do you think of this Paygo law? Do you think it's for real?
It is for real, but she didn't go into examples of where the Democrats have already betrayed their word that they would strictly pay as they go. In other words, that if they put an item in there which calls for increased expenditures, they would take something out of the budget on the other side to equal the increase. There's one example she provided in regard to the alternative minimum tax. I know there's at least one other, and I don't recall instantly what it is, but I will check my notes on that. And I think a third example may have come up recently, but no one asked about it. Now, what about the global warming bill that's been going through the Senate, which recently was just voted down? The Barbara Boxer, Joe Lieberman, and Warner Act, which is a very bad bill. Somebody should have asked her if it had been passed by the Senate, how she would have voted on that, because that calls for some increases in expenditure which were not going to be offset pay as you go. And a lot of other faults, by the way.
What questions would you have asked her or like to have had asked of her that did not get asked today?
I would have asked her to provide a real solution to the veterans' complaints that I hear constantly, because I talk to veterans as I go around, as she does too, at least indirectly, because she has veterans coming to her office, to her staff people with problems.
Mm-hmm.
I would really like to ask her, what's the basic solution here? What I'm learning from veterans is that the VA is a really cumbersome, unresponsive, bureaucratic organization where even if they get their attention, they have to wait months to get treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And also, there are things that are not covered under Medicare and Medicaid that should be covered for veterans, like dentures. I think somebody really needs to press her because she makes such a big deal about her services on the Armed Services Committee as to what is she going to do to either privatize medical and hospital services through the VA, like provide a voucher to veterans. Mm-hmm. This is my recommendation. Yeah. Let's provide a voucher to veterans so they can take to private hospitals and doctors to get the kind of care they want and need. Then it becomes a matter of their choice. Instead, if they go to the Veterans Administration, they have to talk to some relatively poorly educated or poorly trained doctor who's paid too little to get specialized services, and they get the runaround, and to get any services at all, they have to wait months to get what they need. That's wrong. And yet she has no solution to that fundamental problem of the nature of the VA and what the hell can we do about it.
Did you get the impression from her that she's hoping to balance the budget by taxing the rich more? Do you think that'll work?
No. In fact, some things she said, and I have to go to my notes, are clearly wrong, mistaken, or terribly misleading. I mean, the fact of the matter is the upper 1% pay a very significant percentage of the total tax revenues that fund the federal government. I don't have the statistic rightly in mind, but it's something upwards of 18% of the total revenue is paid by the 1% of taxpayers. She doesn't seem to recognize this. So if in fact you're going to put a surtax on the rich, what you probably will have happen, and you can see this in some of the numbers, is that the revenue is going to go down, not up. Because they have choices as to what they do with their income. They have choices as to where to work. They have, of course, they have an army of accountants to help them get around the tax laws.
Now, we do have a real problem with spending in the budget deficit. What would be your solution in place of hers?
Well, my solution is to go to to seek advice of Citizens Against Government Waste, which has come up with 4 pages of budget cuts that could be made without harming the basic services that people need. I mean, there is still, as the Grace Commission indicated, at least 20 years ago, still fraud and waste in the federal government, and nobody's paying any attention to it. And we need to seek serious cuts. And these have already been identified. We don't have to necessarily go back to ground zero and do another commission report. In addition, however, we really need a wholesale tax reform. We need a simpler tax code instead of the thousands of pages of regulations that now govern us through the tax system, through the IRS. And we need one that will provide incentives for saving, incentives for investment, and disincentives for the excess consumption and the undersavings which have gotten into the pickle that we have now. And that, in my mind, is a fair tax, and if not a fair tax, a flat tax, or some combination of those.
What do you feel about her attitude toward public transportation as the solution to all energy problems? Do you agree with that?
Would you repeat the question?
Public transportation was a very great deal of emphasis, both from her and from the questioners. Let us generously call them questioners.
Well, look at what's happening with mass transit, public transportation. People are taking greater advantage of it in response to the escalating gas prices, as well as making other sensible adaptations to reduce demand, which, by the way, will eventually pull the rug out from the speculators that were mentioned by another questioner. But in New Hampshire and in New Jersey and many other states which are highly suburbanized or ex-urban or rural, you have very little mass transit. And she really tried to beg off of these questions as if somehow because they had a state focus, they were not her responsibility. I am a federal official, I really can't get into that. That was her typical response. That was really putting people off in a very misleading way, which I tried to question when I piped in and said, look, these are basically interstate questions, and therefore they are federal.
Well, let's give her some credit.
And we need more mass transit.
Give her some credit that she did at least allow you to ask one question.
Right, and it was basically on her voting record. The appearance, it was basically an appearance versus reality question. How do you justify the appearance of working in a bipartisan way against the reality of your voting record, where you vote 98% with the party line and 99% with Pelosi?